The ringing chime of my doorbell pierced the fog of sleep, carried through the otherwise silent house with an echo that stirred eerie thoughts in my partially dreaming mind. I almost slept through it when the unmistakable sound of knocking, 3 urgent raps against my door, forced away the last of my haze of sleep. "Lucy," I muttered, voice hoarse with sleep, waving lazily to bat my girlfriend awake. My hand met nothing but the air, falling into the empty bed beside me, sparking a sudden rush of confusion that immediately gave way to recollection. She had left for a business trip on the other side of the country that morning and wouldn't be back for another day or so. I was alone. I rose reluctantly, doing my best to rub the feeling of sandpaper from beneath my eyelids as I peered with blurry vision at my nightstand. 3:13. The old clock on my nightstand read, its letters coming into view as my vision adjusted. Who the heck would be here at this time? I had never received a visitor so late since we had moved in, and I felt a wisps of unease wafting through the fog of fatigue. "You're a big girl, Melissa. You can handle late-night visitors without your wife," I told myself, doing my best to keep the instinctive rush of anxiety at bay. I still felt somewhat new here, having only moved to the small town of Cold Lake, Illinois a year prior, and while I enjoyed the small town life, I didn't feel quite as familiar yet. Still, who would be here at this time? I scored my memory of the night before, my mind still groggy from the few hours of sleep that I had managed, until all at once it clicked. I had fallen asleep the night prior doing my usual social media surfing, trying to stay awake while waiting for the pizza that I had ordered myself for dinner that night. I realized that I must have drifted off at some point. At least 2 hours had passed from what I could recall, and I realized at some point that I must have drifted off to sleep. I blinked, confusion blooming. I had ordered around 9 p.m. at the latest. Had they been knocking there for a while? No, I wouldn't have slept through that. And if anything, they had just left my food to freeze on the porch. I sat up. The room was dark. The errant rays of moonlight and the glow from the nearest street lamp seeping in through the closed shutters, only just preventing total blindness. The knocking again, thunderous in the silence of the night, followed by the chime of the doorbell. I searched the sheets from my phone, finding it under my pillow, my hand moving somewhat blindly until the notification had popped up on the screen. Movement at your front door. When we moved in, my wife had insisted that we install one of those doorbell security camera systems to connect to our phones after seeing one too many internet videos of home invasions, and I didn't disagree. On nights like this, when her job required that she be out of town for days at a time, I found it a particular comfort to be able to see who was at our door without having to actually greet them. Another set of knocking made me jump. The final strands of sleep had been tugged from my mind, and a cloud began to mass in my chest. From somewhere outside, one of our neighbor's dogs began to bark, filling me with a familiar sense of anxiety about being a nuisance. I couldn't imagine a logical reason why the food that I had ordered at 9-something the night before would be arriving now, nor why the driver would make such a disruption so late at night. A creeping sense of disquiet began to take root. Rather than physically answer the door, I elected to check the doorbell camera. There was something heavy in the air, a strange surrealness that clung to everything like a fog. giving it an awful dreamlike feeling. My fingers raced across the screen, unlocking my phone and opening the app. Something about having such an unexpected clamor wake my mind from the borders of sleep at such an odd hour made everything feel strangely dreamlike. Anxious anticipation twisted knots in my stomach as the live camera loaded. Each spin of the gray swirl at the center seemingly making the nauseating sensation of butterflies in my stomach multiply. Finally it loaded, the video sparking to life on my screen. "Oh," I breathed. My heart dropped in response, a deep pit forming in my chest. I felt an icy chill raise goosebumps along my skin in immediate response to the person that I saw on the camera. On the front stoop of our house stood a man, something immediately unsettling in his appearance. He was tall and nearly towering out of frame, despite leaning forward to meet the camera. The top half of his head was hidden beneath the brim of the dirty baseball cap that he wore. Filthy blonde hair thick with grease, sticking out from the sides. The fading logo emblazoned on the front of it, at the center of the camera. In bold lettering atop a cartoonish illustration of a pizza. Joey's Pizza. It read, some of the text covered in dark stains, and I instantly recognized the name of the pizza place that I'd ordered from hours before. Johnny's Pizza, a local place that had become a favorite of ours. What I could see of his skin appeared sickly, almost translucent, even in the gray-green tint of the camera's night vision, and stretched, as though his face it didn't quite fit the head that it was on. His thin lips were pulled back into a small cracked grin, stretched across his thin lips, never once wavering as he stood swaying lightly on ungainly legs like stilts. I tried to shake the reaction. Surely the poor man must suffer from some condition. Perhaps he had been burned. A part of me felt awful for the initial response, yet no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the alarm bells that his appearance set off. A name tag hung pinned to his shirt reading, "Hi, my name is Philip." He stood, arms stretched forward, one clutching a red canvas delivery bag, like the kind that I had seen plenty of times before, though far dirtier than usual, covered in unidentifiable dark blotches, bulging out as though it had been stuffed to the brim. The other remained pressed against my front door of frame. Everything about him was alarming. That smile, it made my skin crawl. He looked young, but his skin seemed dry and stretched, as though he had gone through some sort of horribly botched surgery, and everything had been pulled back. Another few thunderous knocks broke the eerie silence, setting the neighbor's dog into another brief frenzy. I was fully awake now, primal discomfort gnawing at my nerves as I racked my mind for an idea of what to do. I was awful in emergency situations, and while there was technically no emergency yet, my mind was already entering panic mode. Yet another ring nearly made me jump from my skin, sustained this time as the man held the button down for almost a minute, the urgency of his attempts increasing. "Hello?" I spoke into my phone before I could think better of it, voice shaking despite my best attempts. As ridiculous as it is in hindsight, my immediate focus was ceasing the clamor before it woke the neighbors. Had I been thinking clearly, perhaps I would have seen the benefit in that and considered against alerting the strange man to my presence. His head tweaked to the right just a bit, adopting an odd tilt, the grin stretching slightly. The skin around his mouth seemed to rip off at points, painful red cuts appearing from the cracked skin.
Hello.
He spoke, an unusual crackle of distortion in the audio accompanying his words. His voice, it sounded wrong, hollow and raw as if from disuse. I shuddered, an icy chill traveling through my bones, raising goosebumps along my skin. His speech was jolted and unusual, as though he were simply repeating something that he had heard before in an unfamiliar tongue.
I have a delivery.
He almost hissed the words, raising the bag out for the camera to see. I could see it leaking, liquid which was indiscernible on camera, dripped from the bottom of the filthy canvas bag. The grin wavered slightly as he spoke, the corners of his mouth twitching as though he were struggling to not smile outright. My heart and mind raced in unison, my resolve buckling under the growing sense of disquiet. Perhaps I was being crazy. The late hour, in fact, that I was alone, making my mind run with paranoia. But something about how late he was arriving, paired with his strange appearance and even stranger behavior. I didn't want whatever he had brought me, especially not directly from him. And not to mention that bag. The more I looked at it, the less it looked like it held the singular cheese pizza that I had ordered, clearly full to the brim with something that was leaking profusely. I don't need it anymore, thanks. I made that order a couple of hours ago. I did my best to inject confidence in my tone that I didn't feel. It's paid for already, and I included a tip, so you can just take it. I'm sorry for the trouble. He tilted his head more as though he were trying to mimic an owl, his grin stretching into a full-blown smile now, making visible 2 rows of abnormally large teeth, seemingly covered in rot and cavity by the dark splotches visible on the camera.
No, I'm sorry for the trouble.
His tone was odd and uneven, as if he were just repeating the words that he'd heard back at me, that voice like gravel dripping with malevolent humor.
I have delivery. Come get delivery.
My breath caught in my throat for a moment, as a cold spasm of fear washed over me at that. I don't want it. I spoke through gritted teeth to stop the shaking of my voice from being heard. If you have to drop it off for policy or whatever, then leave it and go, please.
You have to open the door and come get your delivery.
His voice came odd and warbled, sounding for a moment as though he were mocking my words. An idea emerged amidst the panic, a last-ditch effort at avoiding having to go to the door. I checked the camera, finding the man standing there closer than before, his crooked smile all that was visible of his face now, a row of unusually long, wide teeth, stained with what seemed like cavities filling his mouth. I took some security in the fact that he hadn't moved from the door. At least there I could keep an eye on him. Opening the phone again, I scrolled through the calls of the night prior, redialing the number for Johnny's Pizza. The call was answered after a few rings.
Johnny's Pizza, John speaking. How can I help you?
An older man spoke into the phone, weariness woven into his tone. Yeah, hi, I paused, not quite sure of what to say for a moment. Crap, I thought. I told him everything, all about his employee's unusual behavior, and the odd feeling that I was getting from him, apologizing in the off chance that he was suffering from some ailment. Is there something wrong with him? I finally asked. He paused for several moments, and I could hear the clacking of a keyboard on the other end.
1 medium cheese at 9:13. That's you.
Yes, I responded quickly. The man started ringing the doorbell again,
And he just got there?
The man coughed, flicking a lighter on the other end.
It's Philip, right?
He asked, sounding incredulous. I thought back to the name tag. Yeah, that's it.
That don't sound like Philip. The little guy is squeaky clean, one of the most dependable employees that I've had in a while. Only one not hopped up on some garbage on the late nights.
Little guy. That was far from the word that I would use to describe the towering scarecrow of a man on my front porch. Still, he sounded worried, and I couldn't tell whether his words should quell or intensify my fears.
I've been trying to reach the little guy for a while now. Just figured he had gone AWOL on me. Not uncommon with the work ethic of this generation, but it seemed odd for him. Are you saying that he arrived just recently?
Yeah, a little after 3 a.m. I think he may be on something. His skin looks sickly and his hair looks covered in sweater grease or something and...
Oh Lord,
John interrupted. The sudden shift in his tone made my heart drop, fear palpable in his voice.
His eyes, what do his eyes look like? Does he blink?
My stomach twisted into cold knots at the question. I racked my mind for an answer and, realizing that I had none, quickly moved the phone from my ear, opening the camera app. Sudden coils of shock and horror seized my chest. The man stood mere inches from the camera, his face filling the screen to horrific effect. His eyes. I could feel the urge to hyperventilate taking hold of my heart, racing painfully. Jesus Christ, there's something wrong with them. I spoke frantically as I watched the unblinking nightmare of a face. They're small and dark and there's nothing, no white nothing. They were like those of a shark, two small points amongst the canvas of papery skin, obsidian black and oddly far apart. Despite the lack of iris, I could somehow feel his gaze burned through the screen. That smile, though unchanged, suddenly somehow far more menacing. Dread was beginning to overwhelm me wholly. That face breeding such visceral feelings of horror, the likes of which I'd only known in a nightmare.
I'm sorry, ma'am, I truly am, but I can't help you. Dear Lord, you shouldn't have called here.
What? What do you mean he's your employee? What's going on, I need?
I'm sorry, dear Lord, I truly am.
He interrupted, his tone firm and apologetic, but tinged with a level of fear that seemed almost equal to my own. I could feel the questions piling up, the dam ready to burst.
But I can't help you. I may be in grave danger now just talking to you. Who knows with those things?
What are you talking about? Please, you're kind of freaking me out more. What things?
I've owned this business for a long time, lived in this town even longer, heard a lot of strange things, seen a few that have aged me faster.
I wanted to dismiss his words as some small-town superstitious garbage, but the stark seriousness with which he spoke made it clear to me that he was very serious.
I'm sorry, ma'am, but that thing at your door, it ain't Philip anymore, and I can't help you. Please don't call here again. I'm sure it's already listening. Lord, help us both if it is. I'm truly sorry and good luck.
And with that, the call ended with a chime. I sat there for several long moments, feeling almost like I was falling. My hand shook, the phone still beside my face, eyes locked on the ground ahead, mind racing with strange and terrifying thoughts, utterly shell-shocked. I wasn't sure what I had expected, but that wasn't it. The call had left me shaken in a way that I can't quite express. The idea that I wasn't dealing with someone but something petrified me. It ain't Philip anymore. What did that mean? Was he on some kind of messed up drug or was it something worse? Whatever the case, any doubts that I'd had about whether or not he may be violent vanished at the horror in that man's voice. Another ring, loud and sustained as though he was holding down the bell, pierced the silence that fell between the fists of knocking. A cold mass of dread settled in my gut. I opened the security camera. The skin seemed to pulse and contort at points, as though there were some unheard of muscles spasming wildly beneath. The man, that thing, gritted its teeth from side to side, and I could see just how impossibly large they were, as though meant for the mouth of a creature 3 times his size. A mouthful of massive dull incisors grinding back and forth. Finally he spoke, and I almost felt as though that I may pass out, the panic reaching a fever pitch.
I'm in grave danger. You shouldn't have called.
It was as though 2 voices came from one body at first, his dry and human tone mixing with a voice at first like some eerie parody of the man I had spoken to, quickly improving with each syllable. Clunky at first, but by the end, it was almost indistinguishable. The only audible difference was the sheer maliciousness dripping from every word. This isn't happening, I muttered to myself in vain, the impossibility of what I was hearing hitting like a physical blow. How could he have known that I was calling someone? That aside his voice, that was more than a mere impression. He had spoken with the man's exact voice. The increasingly unavoidable realization that my night had somehow drifted into the realm of paranormal made my stomach turn. I felt as though I might vomit.
Open door or I come inside.
Had I not been operating on survival mode, I may have thought against another call, given how the last one had unfolded. But at that moment I felt almost cornered, and getting help was my only concern. I opened the phone again, pausing for several moments considering whether to call my wife or the police. Another series of raucous knocking making the decision for me. I dialed 911, getting the number ready by making sure not to call and switching back to the security app. Fear betrayed the confidence that I tried to portray, my voice shaking despite my effort. Listen, the police are coming, I've already called them. Just take your stuff and go, you creep. He laughed, a callous and unearthly sound that twisted my stomach into a heavy knot of dread, dripping with malevolent glee at my remark. His body quaked with his shrieking laughter as though what I had said had brought unbridled joy. In an instant, he snapped his head into the upright position with a sickening pop. I felt ill. The skin moved like there was something beneath it, as though he were smiling or frowning beneath it as it clung to his face. I shuddered at the uncanniness of it. Something about his face triggering a primal unease. Was he wearing a mask? No, it couldn't be. I could tell that was human skin as pale and lifeless as it may seem.
No.
It cackled in that dry voice.
No one is coming. I have delivery.
The blood in my veins froze. I switched back to the phone screen, clicking the call button and switching it to the speaker. The passing of every second was marked by the pounding of my heartbeat in my head as I waited for the phone to ring. Seconds passed with nothing but silence on the other end, and I could feel the sense of panic that was almost suffocating starting to arise before I heard a sudden click on the other end, followed by a voice.
Hello?
The dispatcher calmly said. Relief flooded through me like cool water over a burn at the sound of the woman's voice on the other end, though I felt an odd tweak of confusion at the casual nature of her answer. Yes, hi, I would like to report I searched for the proper term. Disturbance? I spoke, somewhat unsure. The line buzzed with a crackle of electronic interference. There's a man at my door. I think he's a pizza guy and he's been banging and knocking and ringing for a while now. I ordered it last night and I told him to leave it at the door because something just seems off about this guy. But he won't leave until I come to the door and... I paused, realizing that I was beginning to ramble from the panic. I composed myself and did my best to detail the events of the night leading up to my call.
I see, man. This sounds very serious.
She interjected. She sounded humorous, almost mocking. Her tone was a far cry from the firm seriousness that I had come to expect from television shows and movies. Was she really not taking this seriously? I felt a flash of anger amidst the fear. Nothing that I had told her was at all far-fetched, and I truly wasn't in a mood for convincing. I just wanted help on the way immediately.
Is there anybody else in the house with you, ma'am?
Her overly cheerful voice carried a robotic tint, the call's connection seemingly poor. No, I'm alone.
I see,
she said, and something in the way she spoke raised my hackles, an exaggerated exuberance in every word as though she were talking to a child.
Well, perhaps you ought to answer the door, ma'am. I'm sure he'll leave once he's completed his delivery,
she said, laughing casually before finishing.
We've all got jobs to do after all.
It was like being struck by a physical blow. My mind reeled at the response. I opened my mouth but found myself at a loss for a moment, taken aback by the unexpected response. I stared at the phone as though it would provide me with a physical answer, and for the first time since the call had started, the phone came to life with the movement. As I saw the words on the screen, my heart plummeted and I could feel my blood turn to ice. Call failed. The words sat on the white screen above the number 911, my head spinning as I saw them.
Ma'am.
The friendly voice of the dispatcher came from over the phone, suddenly seeming far more sinister than before. My hand shook uncontrollably, worsening the more that I tried to stop it, as confusion gave way to cold, mind-numbing dread.
You should answer the door. He has a delivery and he's not going to leave you until you've accepted it.
She spoke in that overly sweet voice dripped with a sinister venom, and as I listened I realized that I could hear something else behind it, another voice. Familiar though I had only heard it for the first time that night. She spoke in unison, her tone blended with the raspy voice in an awful union.
It could be much worse if you don't.
The threat was punctuated by more pounding at the door, this time without end. The clamorous knocking combined with the audible thud of my own heart. The sheer horror of what I was experiencing only compounded. It was like a waking nightmare, each passing event more inexplicable than the last until eventually, I knew that I was undeniably dealing with something out of the ordinary. I had never really thought too much about the supernatural one way or the other before. I didn't dismiss all the stories that I had heard, but I couldn't quite say that I believed them either. But as I sat in my bed, my mind racing with questions like a babbling brook, I knew now that whatever was at my door was something inhuman. I could think of few other options, and the fact that inevitably I would have to confront that man, that thing at my door, crashed over me in tidal waves. The thought of calling Lucy came across my mind, but I dismissed it immediately. I refused to hear it speaking in her voice. I knew that it would push me over the edge of panic, long past the point of rational thought. I may have been already. I rose from the bed, darting to the closet and rifling through clothes until I found what I was looking for. Tucked into a corner hidden behind one of the still-packed boxes was my wife's gun safe. It had been among her insisted security measures now that we were living in our own house, and I was thankful for it now. I racked my mind for the code, the incessant banging returning like some awful chime, somehow raising the already suffocating tension with each passing second. I punched in a few options, and on the third, it clicked open and I removed the familiar handgun and the accompanying clip. Using it was the last resort. I had never trained with it as much as Lucy, for whom weekend trips to the range had been something of a leisure activity. and was only partially confident that I could hit anything with it, but it was better than nothing. Still, the thought of using it somehow filled me with a more familiar sort of discomfort. Its weight was uncomfortable in my hand. The idea that I was holding something capable of destroying life with just the twitch of a finger was, well, I had to not think about it. I held it as I remembered Lucy demonstrating, finger lengthwise along the side of the weapon, away from the trigger, keeping it at my side. Mustering what little resolve I had left, bolstered slightly by the firm sensation of the metal in my hand, I opened the door to my bedroom. The darkness of the rest of the house made its halls seem like ominous corridors, pierced only by the faint glow of a lamp in the corner of the living room, the floor below. Our home suddenly felt very unfamiliar, the air heavy and foreboding. It took everything that I had to push forward towards these stairs, every groan of the old floorboards beneath the carpet under my weight, making me cringe at the thought that he could hear me. I took each of the 12 steps with a tense carefulness, each step bringing me closer to the first floor, closer to the door just around the corner and the alpha man behind it. The anxiety had reached a fever pitch, my heart racing so fast that I began to wonder if it was truly possible to have a fear-induced heart attack at my age, a storm brewing in the dark cloud hanging over me. A chill traveled through me as my foot met the cool marble beneath, the temperature in the air dropping noticeably as I stepped from the stairs and into the foyer, and for a horrifying moment, my mind flashed the horrifying possibility that there was a window open somewhere. But as I approached the front door, I quickly realized that wasn't the case. The air near the front door hung heavy with an icy chill, noticeably colder than the rest of the house. The 3 small windows at the side of the door were stained of some black ichor, the vague shapes of handprints and finger smudges streaking it randomly. 3 spaced out knocks rang out with an eerie finality as soon as the door was in my sight, sending a nauseating sensation rippling through me. My stomach was twisted into uncomfortable knots, dread reaching its boiling point with every step closer to the door. Every limb felt weak, the shaking in my arms and legs beyond my control, and I prayed that it didn't fire by accident. I almost felt ready to collapse as I reached the door, pressing myself against it for balance, nearly stumbling away at the unnatural cold of it. 3 quick taps against the glass of the window above the door, the final tapering off into a grating scratch, made me jump and press myself against the door. My breath caught in my throat as I looked up through the window a good 7 feet from the ground, catching sight of the man's pale hand sliding slowly down the center. Unless he was standing on something, which I doubted, his arm had reached far past what should have been possible for any human, let alone what I had seen on the camera. I suppose I shouldn't have needed any more confirmation that whatever I was dealing with wasn't fully human, but somehow that drove it home. I pulled back the barrel of the gun, mimicking what I could recall seeing Lucy do, and swallowed firmly against the rising nausea in my gut. The click of the lock as I turned it made my heart plummet, my chest filling with both an icy horror and a conflicting surge of adrenaline. Before I could convince myself otherwise, I tightened my grip on the weapon and opened the door. I spun from around the door, raising the gun to meet the thing on my porch with shaking hands and squinted eyes, bleary from nervous tears. My heart burned with searing adrenaline, the sound of its frantic beating heavy in my ears, and my stomach flipped, and I prepared as much as I could be to see that figure looming over me, that awful grinning face inches from my own. But there was nothing. I stood there for a few tense moments, gun raised, staring out at our street of the silent subdivision. Nothing but a few parked cars and trees moving in the cool breeze in my sight. I remained there for a few moments as the panic slowly waned, giving way to an intoxicating mix of hope cut with a bit of suspicion. Was he gone? The thought was like a candle in a room that had been blanketed for far too long in darkness. A ray of hope. I had to be sure. My every muscle felt tight with anxious anticipation as I stepped out onto the porch, greeted immediately by a wet plop and a waft of some awful scent. It didn't take a genius to identify it. The reek of blood and feces, the fetid stench of death. I looked down to see my white slipper now stained a deep red, my foot at the center of a pile of dark, coagulating liquid that had pooled over the welcome mat, likely from whatever the contents of the bag were. Gross, I spat, retching slightly as I kicked my foot in a vain attempt to rid it of the awful mix. My eyes watering and stomach bubbling, I stepped out and over the puddle, making sure to avoid it as I scanned my front lawn. There was no sign of the strange man or whatever he had come to deliver. Slowly but surely, the cool rush of hope began to trickle through me, as silence seemed to reclaim the night. Icy dread rolled through me, making my skin crawl as I heard 3 fleshy pops ring out from behind me, from inside the house. For a brief moment, I agonized over what to do, turning slowly to face the person or creature in my home, ready at any moment for the attack. It stood barely 5 feet away, partially concealed by the darkness of the house, but enough of it was visible for me to realize how much of its horrific appearance the camera had failed to fully impart. Its head hung to the side at an impossible angle, the smile stretching across it, inhuman, a thin gray mouth, lined with razor-sharp teeth, grinned visibly beneath what appeared to be a human mask. No, not a mask, a skin. It clicked immediately. He was wearing poor Philip's skin. His head was massive, swollen and malformed, and where there should have been a nose, the skin hung loosely as if whatever was beneath it were flat. It held the delivery bag in one of its arms, which extended far longer than it should have, opening it to reveal the contents within. I couldn't help myself. The violent churn of my stomach hardly gave me enough warning as I saw why the bag was leaking so much, and vomit spewed forth, once and then twice. From within the bag, I could make out the tangle of broken limbs, difficult to identify at first as the skin had seemingly been entirely degloved. But when my eyes fell on the face staring back at me, red, angry flesh exposed, I knew immediately that I was seeing the horrific remains of the original driver. He or it took a long deep breath, the skin over the center of his face shuddering as the sound broke the silence, head tilting back with a long, euphoric shudder. It stepped forward on legs long and ungainly, extending far past the jeans it must have taken from Philip, stalking forward. "What do you want? What do you want? Why me?" I had reached a tipping point, fear giving way to sheer exhaustion. I was tired of this. A regular night had been turned into a horror movie, and I wanted answers from the thing responsible, even if it killed me. I want to do my job, please. Just leave me alone, oh God." It started speaking with that same hoarse, inhuman croak, but quickly it morphed into the voice of a young man pleading, desperate and raw with horror that I had never heard before but very much felt. It took me only a few moments to realize what was happening. It was mocking me. I wasn't going to get an answer. In fact, I doubted it even had one, besides the fact that Philip had somehow caught its attention. And since he had been en route to my house, I had become next for its sick designs. Its long arms seemed to retract, sliding across the floor with a faint hiss. Long dark claws that seemed fit for some sort of predatory animal protruded through the skin of its hand, which I quickly realized had also been taken from Philip, worn like a tattered glove. The chill of the metal from the gun at my waist brought it back to my attention, and before I realized my hand was slowly moving towards my hip. My breathing felt ragged and uneven with every painful throb of my heart. Its head tilted further. the thin smile on the mottled gray skin beneath its nightmarish mask widening as its muscles tensed with awful intent. I burned an image of Lucy into my mind, knowing if these were my final moments, I wanted to be as close to spending it with her as possible. My hand went for the gun. The air was pierced by a cry of something like that of an infant, but deep and distorted, raising every hair along my back, and sent my stomach into free fall as my hand closed around the handle. Furious hope surged through me with the weight of a weapon in my grip as I pulled it from my waistband, doused immediately by a tidal wave of sheer dread as I saw it. It was on me in seconds, crossing the room and over at me in blinding speed. Panic guided my every action as I turned and pointed the gun, firing in the same instant, no time to aim. My ears rang from the explosive sound, momentarily disoriented before I felt a sharp pain exploding through my arm. Icy fingers covered in claws the size of my thumb digging into my forearm. I missed. It had caught me in time, forcing my arm up and making me shoot off towards the ceiling uselessly. A spray of drywall burst forth as the bullet ripped through. It tightened its grip, and it took all that I had to not scream with the excruciating pain. My arm was surely broken, the thought was fleeting. The realization that I was surely going to die far more pressing. It yanked me closer, its face mere inches from my own, an overwhelming reek of decay wafting from its mucus-covered skin. It made a long and guttural clicking from its throat as it smelled me, those beady eyes shining with malice. "Always taste the best when afraid," it spoke. I shut my eyes, unwilling to see whatever was happening next, bracing myself for what was to come. Sharp pain radiated out from the bottom of my jaw as I felt its claw pierce my skin with an almost surgical carefulness, slowly sliding beneath. It was going to take my face, just as it had the poor driver. I felt a scream rising in my throat. The ringing in my ears grew louder, and I wondered if the shot hadn't caused permanent damage. Not like it would matter for long. I felt its sticky breath on my face, rancid with the smell of blood and rot, its fingers sliding beneath my skin, blood down my neck. The ringing grew louder as I waited for the burst of pain, louder and nearer. I realized with the first surge of real hope that I had felt that night. It was the sound of approaching sirens. As I opened my eyes, I could see the distant glow of flashing red and blue from somewhere nearby. Its gaze snapped up in the direction of the approaching sound and it hissed, frustrated fury palpable. From what I could tell, the sirens were coming from the opening of the subdivision, barely a minute from my house. Its grip tightened as it drew me closer, whispering a final message in my ear. "See you again." As two squad cars rounded the bend into our cul-de-sac, it tossed me aside and into the wall with force, and I hit the ground with a thud, landing in the ever-growing puddle of liquid spreading from Philip's body. It shot me a final glance, shuddering with something unreadable before it threw itself over the side of the porch, disappearing into the darkness and into the trees of the small forest behind the house. By the time I gathered myself, stumbling back to my feet and onto the front lawn, waving frantically and screaming until my throat hurt as the flashing red and blue lights filled the night. My mind was in a state of blind panic, any worries of causing a disturbance long in the rear view at that point, solely focused on getting around other people and away from whatever I had just encountered. A few of the more brave of my curious neighbors had begun streaming out of their front doors, watching the commotion that I was making with concern and interest, others peering from cracks in the curtains. I wondered to myself if anybody had been watching before, if anybody had seen that thing besides me, but dismissed the thought as officers began questioning me. Apparently, they had been caused by a neighbor who had reported a noise disturbance from all the knocking, so when a follow-up call came about shots fired, they were already nearby. The police were far less helpful than I would have hoped, though at that point the mere fact that I was alive and not shoved into a foot-long pizza bag was cause enough for celebration. They searched the house and found nothing, and upon searching the doorbell camera found the footage had somehow been wiped. The EMTs cared for my injuries, asking questions as to how I had attained the strange wound under my jaw, as though something had been inserted there, and I wasn't sure how to answer. I told my story to the officers, whose reactions ranged from skepticism as the most common, to an almost knowing sort of look that seemed to pass between a few of the older guys. As we wrapped up, I placed a call to my wife. She was asleep, so I left a voicemail explaining what happened, and reminding her how much I utterly adored her given how close I had come to never being able to say it again. I spent the rest of that night at a local motel, taking a much-needed shower, and didn't sleep very much at all, not even returning home until Lucy's trip had ended. Things progressed as normally as one could expect in the weeks afterwards. The police weren't much help the few times that I had gone to them for updates, and I quickly began to suspect that they may be hiding something, that there may be something more to what I experienced. That is sort of why I'm writing this. I've been doing my best to move on from that night, as ridiculous as that might seem. It's strange how quickly you can begin to rationalize the irrational once the moment has passed. And since moving out wasn't an option given the money that we had just put into the home, I had no option but to cope. Things were fine, normal, and I had been content to try and leave the event a nightmare, until yesterday morning. Last night, I heard news that made my stomach drop. It echoed from the TV in the living room as I prepared my dinner, finding ordering out quite unappealing since my experience when a name caught my attention. Thanks, Hal. Our next story comes from the small town of Cold Lake, Illinois, where tragedy appears to have struck a local pizzeria. Johnny's Pizza has been a longtime fixture of the town. Its owner, John McLennan, was something of Cold Lake royalty. Well, reports from law enforcement tell us here at LNPN that our town's king of pizza was found dead in his pizzeria last night. My heart dropped, as did the cooking utensils in my hand as I quickly made my way to the living room. Initial reports indicate that he was found, and I do warn our sensitive viewers now before I continue. Flayed but just barely alive. Police say he had been somehow shoved into one of the pizza ovens. He would pass away from trauma-related injuries hours later at the hospital. As of right now, the CLPD have no suspects. And now here's Tammy with the weather. My head seemed to spin, nausea rising while my mind reeled as from the murky depths of memory the man's words from our call echoed. I'm sure it's already listening. Lord help us both if it is. I may be in grave danger now just talking to you. That's why I'm writing this now. I don't really know what else to do with my guilt, but perhaps give someone the warning that I never had. If the pizza arrives after 3 a.m., don't answer. Ask them to leave it if you must, but do not answer the door, and for the love of God, don't call anyone. That's it for now. I apologize for the rushed ending, but I would like to hurry and get this posted. The security camera system on the door is still down, and Lucy's at work. And I can't be sure if I think I just heard a knock at the door. Now, I enjoy exercising quite a bit, and whether it be going for a run or playing basketball at my local park. I do enjoy it, but the soreness and pain that comes afterwards isn't always the best. I had been searching for a remedy for a while when I stumbled upon CBD, and it's definitely helped with the after-workout pain. CB Distillery has been my go-to ever since for CBD products because they only use 100% clean ingredients. That means no artificial colors, flavors, or preservatives. And with over 2 million satisfied customers, you know that they're reliable. If you're frustrated with a health concern that's not getting better, try CBD from the source that I trust, cbdistillery.com. Let me get you on the right path with my 20% discount. Just visit cbdistillery.com and enter my code Mr. Creeps for your discount. No prescription required. That's cbdistillery.com. Promo code Mr. Creeps for 20% off. That's cbdistillery.com.